Welcome to Publishing in Defense, Security, and Politics, a special series of On Defense and Security. In this series, we speak with editors to understand opportunities for publishing research on defense and security, international relations, and related topics. On Defense and Security is a podcast produced at the Center for International and Defense Policy. On today's episode of On Defense and Security, we're delighted to be introducing the Canadian Foreign Policy Journal, and we're joined by co-editor Philippe Lagassé, the Barton Chair in International Affairs at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. The Canadian Foreign Policy Journal is a fully peer-reviewed interdisciplinary journal published 3 times a year by the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. Established in 1992, CFPJ is now one of Canada's leading journals of international affairs. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I was wondering, to start things off, if you would be able to describe the scope of your journal and how it fits within the broader field of international affairs.
CFPJ is, as you kind of mentioned, a fairly wide-ranging journal. It touches not only on Canadian foreign policy, but also all various subsets of that approach and that field. So going from trade to diplomacy, to Canada and international organizations, to Canada and security, defense, intelligence, civil military relations as well, including Canada's approach to matters that deal with strategic and military studies too. So it is fairly wide-ranging. What we try and do to anchor the journal, however, is to have a Canadian component to what is in it. So that's really the unifying element to it, is Canada and the world, as it were, trying to unify that. But within that, that still allows for studies of internal security when appropriate, civil military relations, as was mentioned, cyber, all sorts of different ways of studying security and defense within the Canadian context, all while trying to ensure that it is a journal about Canada, and therefore with a Canadian angle to most of the articles that we publish.
So despite that kind of empirical focus on Canada, relatively open in terms of theoretical, methodological approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing with the journal of late is recognizing that alongside International Journal as the other big international affairs journal in Canada, IJ has tended to have historians as editors more recently, and IJ has tended to have historical articles as kind of a key part of what they do in their approach. We, reflecting a little bit more what we see at the Norman Paterson School, where we're a multidisciplinary school that includes a number of legal scholars. So the journal has tried to branch out and invite more legal submissions as well. And as a result of that, we have expanded the word count for the articles. So up until last year, the journal tended to aim for about 5,000 to 6,000 words. We've since expanded that to 10,000 or more, up to 12, and changed the citation format to make it a little bit more inviting to legal scholars who want to work in this area and who don't necessarily want to publish in a law journal. So this is the other kind of main pillar of our CPFJ's interdisciplinarity, is we tend to be Canadian foreign policy, Canadian security policy with law, contrasting a little bit more with IJ's historical focus.
How does the review process work at your journal? Have there been any changes as you've adjusted the scope of articles?
So one thing that the journal went through in recent years was a lot of special issues, and the special issue focus tended to lend itself to the guest editor having a role within the peer review process. We've since walked away from that and reinforced a more rigorous peer review process overseen only by the editors-in-chief themselves. So an article will come in, and even if it's now part of a special issue, we maintain full control over the peer review process. Typically, it really varies. For the policy commentaries that we have, which are much shorter pieces, you may only have a single reviewer depending on what it is that you're offering, since it's not as grounded in methodological rigor, and it's more of a commentary on things that we'll just we on occasion we may only get one or two reviewers for a piece like that. For longer pieces, typically you're expected to see about 2 to 4 reviewers, really depending on availability and who answers the call, as it were. But we do try and ensure that our authors get a good number of reviewers and really helpful comments in order to improve the papers to the greatest possible.
I'll just note here that I've had some wonderful review experiences with the journal and really appreciate the constructive tone that the reviewers took. Not always a guarantee.
No, that's, I mean, I think this is part of the changes that are happening in the academy writ large, right? I think there is a recognition that the review process as it existed almost brought out some of the worst tendencies in the academy, and that journal editors should endeavor to try and make the review process rigorous without making it mean or without making it unduly harsh. We're all engaged in the search for knowledge and truth, and therefore, we should be encouraging one another, which isn't to say that articles can't be rejected if they don't meet the standard, but when you're making revisions and recommendations, you do want to keep in mind that the purpose of this is to try and improve the research, not necessarily shoot it down.
You had mentioned a bit of a pivot towards welcoming legal scholarship, but I was wondering if there are any other emerging debates or themes or topics that your journal is particularly interested seeing submissions covering.
Well, I think dovetailing a little bit with what I said earlier, it's difficult when you're dealing with a journal that's called Canadian Foreign Policy Journal. People tend to think that it's only Canada looking externally, but there's so many topics, particularly when it comes to security and defense related issues, that are increasingly internal, as it were. So everything around intelligence, security intelligence, for instance, may not necessarily have an external component. Terrorism studies and violent extremism, right-wing violent extremism, ideological motivated violent extremism. Some of this can be contained within Canada itself and doesn't necessarily need to include a foreign policy or an external issue as part of the study. So recognizing that, as given the name of the journal, that there are some topics that are really more within Canada, as it were. Obviously not always the case when you're dealing with Canada and international organizations or Canada's diplomatic position or whatever it is, but there are a number of subsets of the field that are more trying to create space for these other types of studies that are not recognized by Canadian politics as belonging to Canadian politics per se, but are also then not recognized as belonging to Canadian foreign policy per se, and yet they need a home. And I'd like to think that we're providing that.
For scholars who may be looking to make their first submission to the Canadian Foreign Policy Journal, are there any recent articles that potential authors might look to as good examples, or other advice that you might have to folks considering that first submission?
I would certainly encourage you to look at the articles that have been published over the past 12 months since summer 2024. That's when the journal started going in a slightly different direction. So on account of that, you'll see kind of the larger scope, the new citation style. And one thing I really caution people about is, because we've decided to change this, it is important to stay on top of the new citation. It's not what it was in the past, so just make sure you're up to date on it. Similarly, when it came to the length, just recognizing that now we do have that larger word count, and to take advantage of it if you so choose. But really, I would encourage people to look at the more recent issues to see what kind of things that we're emphasizing and the different panoply of topics that we've seen. So we have a number of topics or papers that have come out, for instance, on Canada and the Caribbean. There have been a number of different papers coming out about Canada and the Middle East. So there's a lot out there, but I can't point to one single article or even a set, because precisely we are trying to encourage lots of different perspectives. But just be mindful of the fact that we are now heading in a direction of a lot more methodological plurality, and therefore, scholarship that can be legalistic or can be more grounded in empirical social science. They both have a place in the journal.
Thank you very much for sharing a bit of your afternoon. Again, we've been discussing today the Canadian Foreign Policy Journal, edited out of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs by Philippe Lagassé and Stephanie Carvin. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much.